Hi, this is Vincent Kilcoyne. I'm just speaking with you from the UK. I'm going to take you through some ideas today and to actually share with you the experiences that we've been seeing in the industry from the point of view of both regulation and technology, as these are converging and introducing new operating models, new ways of actually looking at problems. All right. So what I'm basically going to do very briefly is take you through this and talk to you firstly about the way in which regulation is changing, and explore some of the elements around that and what it actually means. Some of the changes in technology as we're seeing them as they're happening right now. And then how do we at SmartStream approach those, bearing in mind that we've been operating within the financial technology sector for a number of decades. So we've seen a huge amount of the transition and the change that the industry has been going through. And then what we do to actually leverage these from the point of view of regulatory solutions, technology change, etc. So firstly, let's look at really what's happening from the change perspective. So we know that the current environment is challenging from the point of view of regulatory change, from the point of view of technology change, and let's not even talk about the current situation that we're all going through. So when we look at the regulation world, we can see that there are a lot of them, but they're also incredibly important. And I think when I speak with a lot of my colleagues in the industry, they talk about how there are enormous parallels between what's happening now in the industry and what actually happened more than 10 years ago, 2007, 2008, 2009. But there is one fundamental paradigm shift in the way in which it's actually being encountered, it's being managed. And that is that the regulation has led to incredible stability. The regulation that was brought about in the aftermath of 2008, 2009 has actually created a huge amount of transparency, visibility, etc., and confidence within the industry. So that has been very much pivotal in us being able to go through this, us being able to manage the increased volatility, the increased volume, particularly in collateral management and margin calls, etc. So when we actually now look at regulation, we're actually seeing it as being part of the solution, with a fundamental shift in people's thinking around what happened back in 2007, 2008, 2009, and what's happening now. Back then, the perception was that banks were very much part of the problem. Now, the complete change is that banks are part of the solution. And why is that? It's very much because of the regulation that has actually come to exist. So when we look at it, we all recognize that, yes, regulation is and are complex. So that does mean that the way in which you interpret them, the way in which you view them, the way in which you interact with them, the way in which you solve them is fundamentally a complex and challenging problem. But let's look at this from the point of view of the global arena. Right. So when we actually step forward, we can see what exactly is happening. We can see that from this diagram here, you can see the wealth and the diversity and also the global nature of the regulations that are actually being deployed. And we can see that as we kind of go into the heart of the semicircle, which was incredibly well prepared by Moody's, you can see that there's an enormous density of regulation within this semicircle, right, as we move closer in towards 2015. And as we go further out, we can see that, again, those regulations are being deployed. They're being rolled out globally. And when you look at the Asia-Pac region, we can see here that there are FRTB. Well, that's a global regulation. So that's actually presents itself across all of the actual geographic regions that we're looking at. But one very important part is when you look at the Asia-Pac region, we can see the Southeast Asian Central Banks Association have actually come together and have created a very interesting organization, which looks and brings together a lot of regulators and central banks to see how can we actually roll those regulations out within the region? How can we roll them out with a degree of consistency to engender and create a real sense of systemic stability within the region? So this is very interesting, the way we see regulations and regulators working together to actually drive the correct outcome. So what happens within the technology world? Well, again, it's all very, very similar, incredible parallels. So just as we had very, very plentiful and complex regulation, we also have plentiful and complex technology change. So we're looking at deep learning, AI, distributed ledger, high performance compute, in grid, in memory, in database, artificial intelligence, all of these things, natural language processing, all of these technologies are presenting themselves and are actually making it possible for organizations like ourselves and yourselves to harness that capability to deliver new outcomes, to make it possible for us to be truly compliant with the regulations. So when we look at the intersection of those, and if we look at this diagram here, we can see how when we go right into the center, it's all fundamentally dependent on a foundation layer of data. So we know that as an industry, we are awash with data. There's an incredible wealth of data. And when we actually apply the different technology stacks, such, for example, distributed ledger, cloud computing, advanced analytics, AI, etc., big data, natural language processing, well, high performance compute, we can then break what's happening in the industry from a regulatory perspective into what I'm categorizing as 5 broad categories. We've got payments and liquidity. So if we take those technologies and we take a payments and liquidity view of the world, we can see how certain regulations, certain market activities and behaviors around faster payments, BCBS 248, which is intraday liquidity, which obviously wouldn't have been possible many years ago without the high performance compute capability and without the readiness of the data. We also look at GDPR, we're looking at PSD2, we're looking at open banking initiatives. So it's very much looking at it in terms of categories. Then when we look at supervision, we can see that we've got FRTB, we've got Basel IV, we've got TRIM, we've got IFRS, we've got all of these different elements again. So what I've tried to do is to look at how the world actually presents itself from a regulatory behavior perspective, and then see how the technologies then overlay against that. And there's an incredible sharing of technologies. So most organizations are now starting to look at how those technologies can actually be used to solve a multitude of problems for the overall community. So what do we do in that, right? So we deliver all of our solutions. And we've been solving these problems across all of those categories: payments and liquidity, supervision, conduct, etc. And we've been mobilizing our technologies and changing them over the decades, as one has to do, because of all of the natural problems and all the natural challenges, but also because of the opportunities that it presents. And we've now been making those technology solutions available through our on-demand and hosted and cloud capability across AI and machine learning. We deliver reference data solutions. We deliver reconciliations, which is very much operational and matching and exception management, because fundamentally that's what drives our downstream capability. It drives the automation within the industry. For cash and liquidity management, it's a very interesting challenge, because cash and liquidity management is not only about managing your cash and your liquidity, but also being able to give you access to advanced stress testing, and under BCBS 248 being able to satisfy the regulatory requirements around stress testing, but also giving you the ability to create stresses that more accurately reflect your specific market, your geographic market, the demographics within which you operate, your counterparties, the business models you operate. How do you actually address those? Also, from the point of view of collateral management, a wealth of solutions, corporate actions processing, I'll step through each of these separately, digital payments and investigation, and fees and expenses management. So all of these are elements that you need to be able to access. We, organizations like ourselves, need to be able to provide you to be able to address not only the regulatory, but also the operational and the cost control and compliance elements of your business. So when we look at our data solutions, what are we doing? So we're driving operational efficiencies. That's fundamentally it, through the quality of data. And when we reach out to pretty much every organization that we talk to, they always say that their data is good quality until they actually start trying to use it. And then the reality sets in. So what this is all about is, if you want to be able to make important decisions, you want to be able to address the true regulatory problems, it's all fundamentally driven by the quality of the data. that you have within your systems. So what we try to do is we ensure high quality of information and the availability, and this drives synchronization between the systems. You also drive automation and control, because if you don't have high quality of golden source data, how can you drive automation? You're operating the system in a situation whereby you have massive disconnects in the quality of the data, and we try to eliminate that. And that obviously drives control. Then what we want to be able to do is what everybody's worried about right now, the digital agenda. And that's probably actually more relevant now on the back of the current challenges that we're encountering. The digital agenda is now more front and center within every organization globally than it ever was. So it's all fundamentally driven by data and quality of data and the ability to automate based on the quality of that data. And then we also want to be able to ensure that we deliver speedy remediation to any disconnects between systems and between operating models, operating procedures, geographic regions, etc. So this is very much at the heart of what we try to achieve. When we look at cash and liquidity, and this is really, really important, because we all look back at what happened in 2007, 2008, 2009, and we realize that fundamentally the industry went through an enormous liquidity crisis, which became a credit crunch, all right? And the regulators have come together and have brought out some very, very good, strong regulations. BCBS 248 presents itself at an incredibly relevant time, when organizations need to be able to see not only their intraday, but their intraday liquidity capability and the consumption and usage, etc., of the funds. So what we want to be able to do is manage that situation, provide true visibility of it, not only short-term, medium-term, and long-term, but deliver the control of that information, fundamentally driven by the access to the downstream, real-time information coming into and out of your organization. You want to be able to mitigate liquidity risk through visibility and control. And that's really what it's all about, being able to become aware of any discrepancies or failures of expected or unexpected movements against limits. So all of this information is actually being driven by the availability and the ability to capitalize and capture the real-time data. You want to be able to adhere to BCBS 248 and BCBS 144, Principle 8, because these absolutely drive the regulatory regime and, again, the stability of the underlying industry, all of which, again, are fundamentally capable because of the technology. So, again, we have the intersection of regulation and technology. The regulation has only been possible to deliver because of the technology. And organizations who harness the correct technology can deliver not only the regulation and satisfy the regulatory requirement, but can also drive improved decision-making, better control, better quality, better access to all of that information. So these are all the underlying challenges that are being faced. But by bringing the two worlds, for example, in cash and liquidity, of real-time access to information, the ability to gain access to high-performance compute, the ability to actually access your intraday liquidity at the second or in real time, that's a technology challenge, satisfying a regulatory agenda. So when we move on, we look at the collateral management world. Everybody knows that the volume across the industry has increased substantially. We've seen a huge change in that, and that's really driven what's happening in the industry. We're seeing extensive access and connectivity to bring in-stream systems to make sure that all the internal systems are actually part of this system, driving automation, reducing risk, driving control, right? And really, when we look at it, we know that in the back of the current turmoil in the industry, we know that some regulations have been relaxed in relation to UMR, but the readiness within the industry must improve, and organizations must be able to embrace and address the UMR requirements. So we're actually making it possible for our solutions to be available through on-cloud and through an on-demand capability, so that we can actually make it possible for new entrants and newly qualifying participants to actually be compliant with the UMR. But again, this is a combination of regulation and technology, making it possible to satisfy those requirements. So when we look at corporate actions, again, this is a very interesting challenge, because when you look at a lot of the activities within the industry, you want to make sure that you can take solutions and scale them and configure them to suit the way in which you operate your business. And this is very much the way in which we've been driving our solutions. We've been engineering into our solutions the ability to process at high volume, high speed, but also to be able to configure it to suit the way in which you operate your business, to create new types of events, new types of alerts across the corporate actions lifecycle. And this is very much at the heart of what we do. You've got to be able to remain abreast and in compliance with the technologies and the regulations, but you've also got to be able to embrace new standards, ISO 20022, for example, that everybody's talking about. And this is all fundamentally driven by a flexible technology that embraces change and makes it possible for you to be able to change your operating models. So when we look at this, we can all say, well, these are actually individual siloed problems. Well, actually, in reality, they're not. The reality of the situation is that you need to be able to combine these to deliver not only the solution as it relates specifically to that regulatory regime or that regulatory vertical. But actually, if you can bring together things like data reconciliation and cash and liquidity, you've got a real-time view of your cash position. You've got a real-time view of your cash flows. What's real, what actually happened versus what was predicted. So this is the ability to bring both of these two worlds together. This is high volume data, knowing that you've got the golden source, you've got the trust of the data with the ability to make real-time decisions and the true understanding of where your position is across your bank right now. When we bring together cash and liquidity with collateral, well, that makes it possible for us to have inventory management, which again is one of the big problems that we're finding in the industry. You also have to have an understanding of the source and use of funds. Again, by breaking the problems into discrete areas, yes, you're solving that specific problem, but by being able to bring multiple views of those worlds together, you're actually getting an even better outcome. If we take, for example, the fact that we're bringing together cash and liquidity and our AI solutions, we're bringing predictive analytics to when do I think these funds are going to arrive? When is this movement going to actually happen? Based on the behavior in the past. So we're actually able to bring all of those so we can actually make better use and management of my buffers, etc. So we can actually start to bring these different solutions to really drive real benefits across the industry. Bringing together data reconciliation with fees and expenses is to actually understand the costs of services for payment service providers. And again, this is one of the big challenges. If you're looking at launching a new business or you want to really truly understand the underlying cost of your business, you've got to be able to bring those elements together. Now, the beauty of PSPs is that this is a perfect example of where technology and regulation has created a new operating model, and you want to be able to serve those. They are pivotal to the industry, and obviously they drive new volume into the banks because of the added flow. And then when we bring together collateral with things like AI, right? So what are we getting there? Well, we're actually getting the ability to manage interest disputes. And we're also looking at being able to do migration. So when we're migrating from one system to another, we're able to bring in all the trades, etc. So these are the ways in which you can look at your world from the point of view of a regulatory and a technology challenge to actually truly understand what's happening, what's going on, how are you managing this situation on a day-to-day basis across all of these different parts of the world, from the point of view of payments and liquidity, from the point of view of conduct, supervision, etc., by leveraging those technologies. And that's really what I want to be able to talk to you about today. What I'm saying is, yes, I can solve for discrete business problems or regulations, but that's a compliance requirement. But actually, when I bring all of these together by combining the data and the solutions that is delivered from multiple solutions, right, I'm actually able to arrive at a more optimal outcome. I'm able to deliver improved decision making, better cost management, greater compliance, easier compliance, less costly compliance. And that's the big challenge, but also I'm able to deliver control. So fundamentally, that's what we are working with our clients to deliver. That's the end game for what our product strategy is and for where we see what the industry is actually going.